My son whispered at dinner, "Grandma said you're the reason Dad cries." The words hit me like a slap across the face, sharp and stinging. Right there at the dinner table with the clink of forks and the hum of the ceiling fan, my son, Ethan, all of 7 years old, leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, repeating what his grandmother had apparently told him in confidence. His wide, innocent eyes held no malice, just curiosity, as if he'd stumbled on a puzzle he thought I could solve. I froze, my grip tightening on the glass of water in my hand, the condensation slick under my fingers. Across the table, my husband, Mark, was cutting into his steak, oblivious, his jaw working steadily. My mother-in-law, Diane, sat at the head of the table, her silver hair catching the light, her smile as polished as the china we were eating off of. She'd been staying with us for 2 weeks, ever since her health scare, which she'd milked into an extended visit. I forced a laugh, brushing off Ethan's comment with a quick, "Oh, Grandma's just teasing." But my voice cracked, betraying me. Diane's eyes flicked up, meeting mine for a split second before she turned to Ethan, asking him about his soccer practice. The moment passed, but it left a splinter in my chest. Why would she say that? Mark wasn't the crying type, stoic, practical, the kind of man who'd rather fix a leaky pipe than talk about his feelings. But the image of him crying, alone, because of me, burrowed into my brain. Had I done something? Was there a truth I'd been too blind to see? That night, after Ethan was tucked in and Mark was scrolling through his phone in bed, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, the woman looking back at me, mid-30s, tired eyes, a few strands of gray creeping into her brown hair, felt like a stranger. I thought about the last few years, the arguments over money, the late nights I spent working, the way Mark sometimes looked at me like he was searching for someone who wasn't there. Diane's words, filtered through Ethan's whisper, weren't just gossip. They were an accusation. I needed to know what she meant, but confronting her directly felt like walking into a trap. She'd always had a way of twisting things, of making me feel small, like when she'd comment on my cooking or suggest better ways to parent Ethan. The next morning, I watched Diane over breakfast. She was all warmth, pouring orange juice for Ethan and chatting with Mark about his work. But there was something in her posture, a tightness in her shoulders, that made me wonder what she was hiding. I decided to start small, to listen more closely, to catch her in a lie or a slip. I asked Ethan later that day, casually, what else Grandma had said about me. He shrugged, kicking his soccer ball against the garage door. "Just that you make Dad sad sometimes. She said it's why he's quiet." My stomach twisted. Mark had been quieter lately, hadn't he? Or was I just seeing what Diane wanted me to see? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than a petty jab. Diane had never liked me, not since Mark and I got engaged. She'd called me ambitious, like it was a dirty word, always hinting I wasn't good enough for her perfect son. But this, planting ideas in Ethan's head, painting me as the villain in Mark's unhappiness, it was a new low. I started replaying every interaction, every time Mark seemed distant, every time Diane lingered too long after a visit. Was she trying to drive a wedge between us? Or was there something real, something I'd missed, that made Mark cry when I wasn't looking? By the end of the week, I was a mess of doubt and paranoia. I caught myself analyzing Mark's face at dinner, searching for signs of sadness. I listened to Diane's conversations with Ethan, straining to hear if she was feeding him more poison. The house felt like a minefield, every word a potential explosion. I didn't know if I was angry at Diane for starting this, at Mark for hiding something, or at myself for not noticing sooner. All I knew was that Ethan's whisper had cracked open a truth I couldn't ignore, and I was determined to figure out what it was before it tore us apart. The days after Ethan's whisper felt like I was living underwater, every sound muffled, every move sluggish. I couldn't look at Mark without wondering what he was hiding, and Diane's presence in the house was like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Her laughter with Ethan, her casual touches on Mark's arm, it all grated, each moment fueling my suspicion that she was orchestrating something. I started losing sleep, my mind racing with questions. Was Mark really crying because of me? Was Diane exaggerating to hurt me? Or was there a truth I'd been too busy to notice? The weight of it pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. At work, I was a ghost, staring at spreadsheets while my thoughts spiraled. My coworker, Jen, noticed, pulling me aside during lunch. "You look like hell," she said, blunt as always. I hesitated, then spilled just enough. Ethan's comment, Diane's shadow over everything. Jen's eyes narrowed. "That's manipulative as hell. She's using your kid to get under your skin." Her words lit a spark of anger, cutting through the fog. I wasn't just paranoid. Diane's move was deliberate, calculated. But why, and how much was Mark involved? When I got home, I watched Mark more closely. He was quieter than usual. His answers clipped when I asked about his day. At dinner, when Diane praised his promotion, he just nodded, his eyes on his plate. I wanted to scream, to demand what was wrong, but Ethan was there, watching us with those big eyes. Instead, I swallowed my frustration, my fork trembling in my hand. Later, in bed, I tried to bridge the gap. "You okay?" I asked, my voice soft. He shrugged, not looking up from his phone. "Just tired." The dismissal stung, but it also hardened my resolve. If he wouldn't talk, I'd find answers myself. Diane was another story. She seemed to sense my scrutiny, her smiles sharper, her comments laced with barbs. When I burned a casserole one night, she chuckled, saying, "Mark always loved my cooking." I bit my tongue, but the jab landed. She was painting me as the failure, the outsider in my own home. I started feeling like I was losing my grip, not just on Mark, but on Ethan, too. He'd repeat things Diane said, like how she thought I worked too much, or how Dad seemed happier when I wasn't around. Each word was a knife, twisting deeper. I snapped at Ethan once, telling him to stop parroting Grandma, and the hurt in his eyes haunted me. I was letting her win, letting her turn me into someone I didn't recognize. The social fallout started creeping in. Friends noticed the tension when we hosted a barbecue. Diane played the doting grandma, charming everyone, while I forced smiles, my mind elsewhere. One friend, Sarah, texted later, asking if I was okay. "You seemed off," she wrote. I didn't reply. How could I explain that my mother-in-law was weaponizing my son's innocence to unravel my marriage? I felt isolated, trapped in a house where every glance held a hidden meaning. My confidence, the part of me that used to laugh off Diane's snide remarks, was eroding. I doubted every choice, working late, prioritizing my career, even the way I loved Mark. Was I the problem? Had I pushed him away without realizing? By the weekend, I was raw, my emotions a tangle of anger, guilt, and fear. I caught Mark staring out the window one morning, his face drawn, and for a moment, I saw it. Grief, or something close. It wasn't just distance. Something was eating at him. I wanted to shake him, to beg him to tell me what I'd done, but I didn't. Instead, I made a choice. I couldn't keep circling the truth like a vulture. I needed to dig deeper, to find out what Diane knew, what Mark was hiding, and why my family felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I couldn't just sit there, drowning in suspicion, so I started digging. It felt like betrayal, poking into corners of my own life. But the alternative, waiting for Diane to drop another bomb or for Mark to crack, was worse. I began with small steps, careful not to tip anyone off. While Diane was out with Ethan at the park, I slipped into the guest room where she was staying. Her suitcase was neatly packed, but I checked the drawers, the nightstand, anything that might hold a clue. I found nothing but her medication and a dog-eared novel. It felt invasive, dirty even, but I was past caring about propriety. Next, I turned to Mark. His phone was always on him, but he'd leave it charging in the kitchen sometimes. One night, after he'd gone to bed, I scrolled through his messages. My hands shook as I opened his texts with Diane. Most were mundane, grocery lists, reminders about Ethan's school events, but one from a week ago stopped me cold. "She's pulling away again," Mark had written. Diane's reply, "You deserve better than that." My throat tightened. Were they talking about me? What did better mean? I wanted to storm upstairs and confront him, but I didn't. I needed more. I started paying attention to Ethan's offhand comments, piecing together what Diane might be feeding him. One afternoon, while we were coloring at the kitchen table, he said, "Grandma says Dad's sad because you don't love him like you used to." My crayon snapped in my hand. I kept my voice steady, asking, "When did she say that?" Ethan shrugged. "When we were making cookies." I hugged him, hiding the rage bubbling inside. Diane wasn't just meddling. She was weaponizing my son to rewrite our family's story. I needed an outside perspective, so I called Jen, my coworker, and met her for coffee. I laid it all out, the texts, Ethan's comments, the way Mark's silence felt like a wall. Jen leaned forward, her voice low. "You need to talk to Mark, not Diane. She's playing you, but he's the one who owes you answers." She was right. But the thought of confronting him terrified me. What if he confirmed my worst fears? What if I was the reason he was breaking? Still, I kept digging. I checked Mark's laptop when he was at work, scanning his emails and browser history. Nothing stood out, no secret accounts, no late-night confessions. But I did find a folder labeled Work Stuff with a single document, a letter he'd never sent. It was addressed to his boss, talking about stress and needing time off. One line hit me like a punch. "Personal issues at home are taking a toll." I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. Was this about me, or was Diane twisting something else, something bigger? I started testing Mark, dropping hints to see how he'd react. Over dinner, I mentioned feeling disconnected. Watching his face, he nodded, said, "Yeah, work's been rough." But his eyes didn't meet mine. Another night, I asked about Diane's stay, saying it felt like she was settling in for good. He laughed it off, but there was a tightness in his jaw. Each non-answer was a brick in the wall between us, and I hated how it made me feel, desperate, clingy, like the kind of person I'd sworn I'd never be. By the end of the week, I had scraps of evidence but no clear picture. Diane's influence was undeniable, her words seeping into Ethan's head and my marriage like poison. Mark was hurting. That much was clear. But I didn't know if I was the cause or just the scapegoat. I was exhausted, torn between wanting to scream at Diane and begging Mark to tell me the truth. One thing was certain, I couldn't stop now. The truth was close, and I'd tear the house apart if I had to find it. I couldn't keep sneaking around, collecting scraps of half-truths. It was time to face the fire. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I asked Diane to leave the living room so Mark and I could talk. She hesitated, her lips pursing, but she went. Mark sat on the couch, his hands clasped, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I didn't ease into it. "Ethan said your mom told him I'm the reason you cry. What the hell is going on?" "Mark," my voice shook, but I held his gaze. He flinched, his shoulders hunching, and for a moment, I thought he'd shut down again. But then he sighed, a sound so heavy it seemed to carry years. "It's not what you think," he started, his voice low. "Mom's been twisting things." He admitted Diane had been pushing him to open up about his stress, claiming I was too busy to care. She'd seen him break down once, months ago, after a fight we'd had about my late nights at work. He'd been overwhelmed, work pressure, bills, the constant juggling of Ethan's needs. Diane had latched onto that moment, spinning it into a narrative where I was the neglectful wife, driving him to despair. "She thinks you're not right for me," he said, his eyes dropping to the floor. "She's been saying it for years." The truth spilled out in fragments. Diane had been planting doubt since our engagement, whispering to Mark that I was too ambitious, too focused on my career to be a good mother or wife. When she moved in, she'd seen her chance to escalate, using Ethan as a pawn to make me question myself. Mark hadn't cried because of me, not directly. He'd been struggling with his own failures, feeling like he wasn't enough for us. And Diane's words had twisted that into a story where I was the villain. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make it worse," he said. "I thought I could handle her." I was furious, not just at Diane but at Mark for letting it fester. "You let her poison our son's head," I snapped. "You let her make me think I was ruining you." He nodded, his face crumpling, And for the first time, I saw the tears he'd been hiding, not from me, but from himself. We talked until dawn, peeling back layers of silence. He promised to set boundaries with Diane, to make it clear her stay was over. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. The damage was done. Ethan's confusion, my paranoia, the cracks in our trust. The next morning, I confronted Diane. She was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her face a mask of calm. I didn't hold back. "You used my son to hurt me," I said, my voice steady despite the rage. "You're done here." She tried to deflect, claiming she was just worried about Mark, but I cut her off. "Pack your things. You're leaving today." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. By noon, she was gone, her suitcase in the trunk of a cab. Ethan cried, not understanding, and I held him, promising we'd be okay. Now, sitting in the quiet of our house, I'm not sure what okay looks like. Mark and I are talking, trying to rebuild. But the scars are fresh. Ethan's still processing, asking why Grandma left. I want to believe we can heal, but part of me wonders if Diane's poison left a stain we can't wash out. I'm trying to focus on the future, on being the family we were before her lies. But sometimes, late at night, I catch myself wondering, what do you do when the truth hurts as much as the lie? If you were me, YouTube viewer, what would you do next?